earlier this year I made a video discussing 5 art tropes I love, not expecting it to do very well, but just wanting to share the tropes that I loved with the masses. But oh man, did that video blow up. Seriously, that video became my most viewed video in a day. So I figured, why not replicate that and share with you guys art and media tropes that I'm not as big of a fan of, and see what you guys think of it. But firstly, a disclaimer that, for the most part, I'm not saying that these tropes are outright bad, just that I personally dislike them and how they're often used, and if you like any of these things, that's perfectly okay. So without further ado, let's get into it. But real quick before we start, the art you're seeing in the background is a fan art piece for the webcomic Cast Off by the Starfish Face, whose YouTube videos have been a great source of inspiration for the types of videos I've been trying to make recently. And I wanted to show my appreciation for her comic, which I have honestly been obsessed with recently. If you want to see this art piece, it's in my Instagram, which I will link down below. Number 1. Motion capture animation. I feel really bad putting this here because one of my friends is obsessed with the Tintin movie, but even if you like movies where motion capture is involved, you can admit that the style isn't the most pleasing to look at. I have personally hated motion capture since I saw that creepy version of A Christmas Carol with Jim Carrey that we were forced to watch in English class because apparently the Muppets Christmas Carol wasn't a sufficient option. Now, beyond it just generally looking a bit creepy, a big reason why people dislike motion capture is due to the uncanny valley. This is where we are more repulsed by something the closer it resembles a human being. So when we see something that looks close enough to a human but is just slightly off, it sets off alarm bells in our head and makes us feel unsettled. Rotoscoping is also disliked for similar reasons. Animation is meant to be exaggerated and stylized, so when we see animated characters moving and behaving so similar to people, it feels off. Long and short, I don't like motion capture. I think it looks creepy, and it's a big part of the reason why I don't play video games, because it just looks weird to me. Please don't come at me with pitchforks. Number 2, the plus-sized villain. Oh boy, I have a lot to say about this one. This one is fairly self-explanatory. It's when a villain character is plus-sized, pretty simple. Now, to make this clear, a villain being plus-sized by itself is not something I dislike. Mammon from Hell of a Boss is one of my favourite villains, and fat jokes are regularly made at his expense, but I don't mind that. By itself, the plus-sized villain is fine in theory, but what I have a problem with is when a villain's weight feels directly tied to their evilness. For example, when you look at Ursula and Ariel from The Little Mermaid, it's not hard to see who the artist wants us to see as the villain and who they want us to see as the hero. Ariel is petite and beautiful in a natural way, whereas Ursula is large, flamboyant and gaudy, and her design is literally influenced by the drag queen divine. It's indirectly telling the audience that these features should be associated with villainy. Another thing I hate is when a character being fat is used as a shorthand for them being gluttonous. How many times when the 7 deadly sins are personified have you seen gluttony just being a fat guy and then they call it a day? A lot of people had issues with the fact that Bea from Hell of a Boss wasn't plus-sized, what with her being the sin of gluttony, but I actually think it was good that this shorthand was avoided, as not all fat people are gluttonous and not all gluttonous people are fat, and I think Bea was a good way to explore this gluttony without relying on weight. As a plus-sized girl myself, this has definitely contributed to low self-esteem, so that's another reason, on top of many, why I hate this trope. Number 3, the love triangle. Now we're getting into it. Possibly controversial opinion, but I cannot stand love triangles. I've always hated them. Even back when I was a kid watching The Dumping Ground, I couldn't stand the episode where Tyler and Jodie were inviting other people to the community dance to make each other jealous. I literally stopped reading The Hunger Games after the first book because I could sense a love triangle forming. Even though I loved the world building, I just couldn't sit through a love triangle. I despise them so much. Again, I know people like love triangles and that's fine, but I hate them. I want to bring up an example to illustrate why I don't like this trope and how I think this media could have done better with it. How to Date Billy Walsh was a movie that, after I first watched it, I liked well enough, but the more I thought about it, the more I realised that the love triangle just didn't work. The main character, Archie, is in love with his best friend Amelia, but she has a crush on the American bad boy Billy. In order to sabotage Amelia and Billy's relationship, Archie pretends to be a relationship psychologist and gives Amelia all of the wrong advice to get Billy's attention, humiliating her in the process. And maybe this would be more excusable if Billy was an awful guy, but no! He's perfectly nice, respectful, and treats Amelia well. So why are we meant to be rooting for Archie and wanting him to succeed when he's an objectively worse person? And of course, Amelia ends up with Archie, even though Archie has done nothing to deserve it and Amelia showed no indication of having feelings for him before. She just had the cliche realization that Archie has been there for me all along, and please excuse me whilst I vomit. I think this movie would have done better and could have been much more interesting if it subverted the love triangle trope, having Amelia end up with Billy instead, and having Archie end the movie by realising that he needs to grow out of his immaturity and that a simple sorry doesn't make up for everything he's done. But no, this movie was clearly trying to emulate rom-coms from the 80s and 90s, toxic relationships and all. There's been pretty much no piece of media that has been able to do a love triangle that I liked, and I avoid it like the plague because I know it'll just end up annoying me. Number 4. Dull protagonists. One of the things that's kept me from getting into older media like old novels is the overwhelming number of boring protagonists that have the personality of a plank of wood. Nick from The Great Gatsby is perhaps the best known example of this, and anyone who's had to read that book for school knows the pain of having to read his narration because of how painfully dull he is. He's much more a means to telling Gatsby's story rather than being part of his own. It seems as though protagonists in older stories were more an audience insert that would experience the plot happening around them rather than being active participants in it, with the Call of Cthulhu or Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde being other examples of this. Now, a protagonist doesn't have to be an active participant in the plot to be interesting to me. Susie from The Lovely Bones is an example of a protagonist removed from the plot physically, but still having an impact on it, as we see the world through her observation of it through her narration, and that feels tragic and intriguing due to her being dead at the start of the book. But I tend to get bored by protagonists who are so dull it's a slog to read through, especially when they'll spend pages droning on about unnecessary details that just weigh everything down. If I feel like I have to force myself to read a book for whatever reason, I just can't be bothered. Number 5. Sexualized characters in children's media. This drives me nuts and I need to rant about it. So I'm not saying that animated characters can't be sexualized or appealing in any way. Shows like Hazbin Hotel or Hell of a Boss can get away with this because they're shows for adults. But why is it that so much animated children's media will have blatantly sexualized characters? This is especially egregious when it comes to animal characters, since you are literally going out of your way to sexualize an animal character that doesn't have that anatomy to begin with. When you're stretching the anatomy of a fish just to give it boobs, I'd stop and think about your life choices. I genuinely don't understand who this is for. Kids are too young to understand that this is meant to be sexual, and as an adult, watching this stuff just makes me uncomfortable. And things like furries are allowed to be sexy because, again, they're meant for adults, but why do we need to be sexualizing characters in children's media? It's just uncomfortable and unnecessary, and I don't like it. And as someone who was a victim of Who Framed Roger Rabbit far too early because my parents saw a bunny on the cover and assumed it was child-friendly, I am a victim of this. And there we have it. Thanks for listening to my ramblings, and I expect your declarations of war in the comments. Once again, you can find this art piece on my Instagram. It's Amy_Lee_H5, and that will be linked in the description. Thank you, and I hope you have a great day.